Hello, and welcome to Case with Learn and BI Norwegian Business School. This is a part of the series we are creating together to explore the main challenges and opportunities to creating good AI as part of BI course Responsible AI Leadership. I'm Samson Esaias from Learn, and my role here is to ask all the simplifying questions and paint the pictures with very bright colors. And my co-host, who will be asking the more academic questions and putting this into a context of this new course that he's co-building with another professor, is Samson Esaias, and he's the Associate Professor of Department of Law and Governance at BI. Our joint guest is my dear friend Finn Myrstad from Forbrukerrådet. He's the Director of Digital Policy there. And in a second, Finn will tell us a little bit more about himself. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have about 30 minutes to talk about something as fancy as dark or deceptive patterns and design. And how do we regulate it? And how do we make sure that people know that they're being out-designed in the digital space? Not only is their data being used against them long-term, but also there are many, many psychological patterns that are being applied very consciously by people who develop these new digital products and services in order to keep people in the game, in the service, and drag them stronger and deeper within their market. So somebody who has been studying this for many years, documenting and analyzing, is, as we mentioned, Finn Myrstad, and he will help Samson explore this space. We always start these podcasts, these cases, by a very short introduction for our guests. So Samson, if you could very briefly say who you are, and then say, please, why did you want to invite Finn as a guest lecturer to your course? And then Finn, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm an associate professor at the Department of Law and Governance here at BI Norwegian Business School. So I'm a lawyer by background, and I have been working on law and technology for almost 10 years now. So I've been associated with the Norwegian Research Center for Computers and Law at the University of Oslo for several years. And I worked with many issues relating to legal issues related to technology, and also completed my PhD on data protection and competition law, looking particularly into control over information and information flows, and how that basically plays into power, both economic and social power. And as you mentioned, Sylvia, we are now developing here at BI a course on responsible AI leadership. So our goal developing this course is basically, so BI produces many managers and leaders every year, and these people are going to be in charge of the next wave of new technologies, and AI would be, I think, a central element of those technologies that these people will be leading. And our idea of developing this course would be, okay, how do we equip these next leaders with the knowledge and tools in such a way that they can develop and use the technology responsibly, that in a way that respects existing legal rules, but also ethical principles. And that's why the work that Finn and his team do at the Norwegian Consumer Council is very important, because they have published influential reports in terms of how companies use deceptive design to force users to make choices that are not really in their own interest, or to make choices that run counter to their interest, either in terms of sharing their data, but also spending time on the service or spending money on those services. So in that sense, it kind of paint a good picture of how not to do things, or how to do things irresponsibly. So I think we can start with those examples that show how not to do things. And my hope is that we can use those examples as a stepping stone to kind of also paint a positive picture of how to do things properly. So I think we can start there.
Very good. And Samson, very briefly, where are you originally from, and what's your most eccentric hobby?
Well, I'm originally from Ethiopia, so I moved here to Norway in 2010 to study my master's, actually, and 10 years later, I'm still here. 12 years later,
actually,
I'm still here.
10 years later, you have a baby.
Yeah, I actually have two.
Two. Very nice.
Yeah. So,
very nice.
Yeah.
And maybe that's your most eccentric hobby as well?
Yeah, I think nowadays, I think spending time with the kids is part of a hobby, part of work a bit. But I don't know I'm not sure if it's exotic, but I like dance as well. So my friends and my wife tell me that I move by every music. At least I get that sense. So that's perhaps one thing. And sometimes when I'm listening to really nice music, I can't wait to get to the elevator to kind of move a little bit. So that's perhaps something that I do enjoy also.
That's very nice.
It
is perhaps a bit exotic, at least in Norway. So I think that's a wonderful hobby. What about you, Finn?
Well, so I moved to Oslo from Brussels, actually, but I'm originally from Vestland, west of Norway. But I lived 5 years in Brussels and a year in London before that, before I moved back to Norway, 2013, where I started my job here at the Norwegian Consumer Council.
What are you by training? I don't know.
No, good question. I have a master's in political science and European politics. But I also have an executive MBA from a few years back. So, and I've worked in the private sector and the nonprofit sector, and so I have a mixed background, which is actually quite helpful in the job that I have now, where it's basically to be a watchdog on behalf of consumers, which is everyone, and more or less in Norway and in around the world. So, where we try to expose tactics that are not great, but also promote a safe market, because consumers want a lot of these services. So we want to try to get the best out of the market. And the way we do that is obviously to do reports, research. We do a lot of advocacy, communications. We meet with companies. We do research as well, which is, I guess, also one of the reasons why I'm here.
Very good. So, Finn, both of you are actually great examples of this opportunity to mix subjects. And these kind of T-shaped individuals, where you have one original professional identity, but then you build in breadth. And digitalization is a very important part of this kind of horizontal skill building. For both of you are more advanced in thinking about the future of digitalization in our country than most technologists. I feel often that we technologists, we just build and don't worry about scenarios going forward, while you do that. So,
yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the, at least for sure, Samson, I won't talk on your behalf, but I feel it's definitely within. If I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't try to think 5 to 10 years ahead. Where are we heading? How can we identify risk? And how do we evaluate what's important and what's not important? You can look at today and you'll have something that's a big problem today. But is it going to be a big problem in the future? And are there things on the horizon that is not a problem today, but could be in the future? And I think that's sort of like where we're trying to make a difference by, working very closely with international partners. Just this week, we launched a huge report on gaming. And I think we ended up having 18 countries participating. And then today, the United States joined. So we had around 35 organizations calling for regulation of gaming, because we've identified how certain aspects of gaming are very predatory, very exploitative, and a lot of people are very vulnerable to these tactics. So that's just one area where we're trying to improve. And it's a huge sector, right? It's bigger than Hollywood. I think it generates somewhere between 150 to 180 billion dollars a year, which is a lot of money. And just in-app purchases, which is the thing we're looking at, is about $15 billion a year and growing. And it's an industry that's not really been looked at by anyone. So that's how we try to be on the forefront of protecting people, because gaming, for example, it's a fun activity. I game myself, but it should be safe when you're doing it, and a lot of users aren't today.
It's and I think what you talked about as exploitative and predatory tactics in product development, it is something that much of business is marketing is based on. They want you to buy, and they need to build this desire to buy more into you, and that's a part of business. At the same time, if you have a lot of help from AI and data applied to human psychology, it can be overly efficient. And this is what we are trying to figure out. So I'm going to leave the floor to Samson to kind of play ball with you. I want to just start with two personal examples that I associate with you. And one of them is a stunt that you did some years ago, where you were reading for, 8 hours or so.
31.
31 hours non-stop reading in order to get through one of these terms of usage, terms of service documents that we all accept when we accept services by these big or small digital providers. And I think to me that really brought home the idea that, it's not just me being lazy or stupid, not wanting to read that text. I can't. I don't know enough law. I don't have the time to understand what I'm actually accepting when I accept them. And so, when you have the world's best lawyers creating these terms of service in order to counterbalance all the regulation that's trying to stop them from using the data, etc., I think we have a real kind of competitive issue going forward. And then the other example that I remember that you talked about was a doll. And it was a doll, I think, with a camera or something like that.
Yeah, a microphone.
A microphone that was recording far more than it really had to, and sending some of this data where you all thought that what you had is a little kind of half-smart doll that could talk to your kid.
Yeah, no, that was a massive kinder egg of, I would say, horribleness, because that was an item, a doll basically targeted kids. It was connected to the internet, and you could talk to it. And we basically discovered that that data was being sent to a contractor in the US, which was all doing voice printing, and your voice is unique. So they're voice printing children. This company was also working for the US military and intelligence services. The data was being transferred to lots of different places. Children could be a victim for targeted advertising based on this. And also it was very easy to hack. The good thing about that story was that it became such a symbol of what was wrong with connected devices at the time, so that the EU actually now are proposing a horizontal law on cybersecurity, and they quote this example as one of the main reasons why we need protection in this area. So that's why I'm hopeful, that this work is important, because even though that was 2016 and we're in 2022 today, and takes a long time, it is moving forward slowly on lots of these areas. And that's what I'm hoping also with the work on deceptive design that we've done, where we've had 4 reports looking at these things, where I'm hoping now the EU are seriously discussing how to regulate this. And, that's also why we're here today. But also because regulation will always be behind, right? So that's why I think this course is really important. This discussion is really important, because companies will always be at the vanguard, always be in front of regulation, and we will always be running behind. So companies that are responsible, I really believe, will have a competitive edge in the future. But that also requires authorities to crack down on the companies that are breaking the law. And we need to have an interplay here.
Yeah.
Samson, the headline that you defined for this conversation is dark patterns and the importance of design in regulations. So if I'm thinking very simply, I'm thinking dark patterns is exemplified by what Finn just described here. And then I'm not sure what design and regulations have to, is it regulating the design, or? So I'll let you help us understand where we want to go now.
Yes, I think perhaps the first thing is if Finn can give us good examples, specific examples of what do we mean by dark dark patterns or deceptive design. And then, of course, the next part of the talk would be, okay, is design actually taken seriously in regulation? So we talk about, for example, control over data, but should we perhaps focus on how companies design product? Of course, data protection law affects design, but perhaps not that much. So I think I would be interesting to hear Finn's perspective in terms of what should law do in relation to addressing these design problems we see. So that is the second part. But I think it would be interesting to start with, okay, what are dark patterns? And if Finn can give us also examples that also intrigued him personally.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'll try to answer the first question, and then please repeat the second question if I don't respond to that. So dark patterns or deceptive designs can be a lot of things, right? I think a lot of people recognize, the pop-ups that we get every day, that's generally a dark pattern because we're incentivized to click that button. It's blue, it blinks out, and it's more difficult to say no to this tracking, for example. That's a classic dark pattern. Another dark pattern could be when you're booking a hotel and you're being constantly bombarded with different messages, or someone booked in your region right now. That's something called a social proofing dark pattern. You can have the stressful dark pattern where they're saying it's an urgent that you book within 10 minutes or a day because it's running out. And also so they're triggering the psychological fear of missing out, often in combination with scarcity. So they say there's only one hotel room left. All these things are dark patterns that is now more and more covered in literature.
Can I just add one personal example there?
Yeah.
I sometimes when I just need to get out of whatever I'm doing and thinking about and into a bubble, I play Farm Hero. And you play a game of, trying to sort a board of some sort of mathematical vegetables. And if you're missing just, a few points in order to pass the game, it will offer you to buy 5 more steps, and this costs money. And finding a way to avoid that is almost impossible. You have to there is a big button that says continue, and then it takes you to purchase, and you have to find a little cross somewhere in the corner that allows you to just give up. And it's actually quite aggressive, I believe. And it's been like that for years now. So do we have any influence over this kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good example. And I could just add to that. We've had reports covering Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. And for example, with Amazon, they have made it, and they make it really hard for you to unsubscribe from the Amazon Prime, not the video, but the Prime membership that gives you lots of benefits. And we documented step by step how it was super easy to sign up, but super difficult to get out. And they used all these psychological tricks, the fear of missing out, the social proofing, what we call confirm shaming you into not leaving. We documented how Facebook was using similar tactics by hiding the privacy-friendly option when they wanted users to turn on face recognition technology, which is highly invasive. We documented also how Google were using, and this is in privacy setting, right? When you set up your Google account, and you often do that after you purchased your mobile phone, for example, and they have 80% or 85% of the mobile market in the world. And once you've broken the seal of a phone, it's hard to return it, right? And then you're prompted by Google to set up your Google account. And in that process, they make it very easy for you to switch on location sharing by default. Because the click flow is designed in such a way that you're very likely to do it. Also, the way they portray your choices and how they communicate what choices you have and the impact of those choices. That actually led us to file a legal complaint against Google 3.5 years ago in multiple countries because it was in breach of the GDPR requirements, of data protection requirements related to that you cannot collect more data than you need, that you should collect more data by default, information requirements, etc. But sadly, the enforcement on this field has been very, very slow.
Yes, I think, Finn, if you can also a bit explain this. I've read some of the reports on deceptive design and the Facebook example on facial recognition technology and this shaming that you mentioned. Could you elaborate on that example? I think that's quite interesting. here. Yeah.
Yeah, so just the face recognition example is very interesting because face recognition, again, your face is unique. It's like your fingerprint, right? It's biometric fingerprint. It's like a fingerprint in your face. With that technology, you can identify people on pictures. You can track if someone suddenly stops smiling in pictures. And if you combine that with other data that you're collecting, like Facebook, you can easily identify if someone is feeling depressed, for example. You can see if they gain weight over time, if they lose weight, and you can infer a lot of things about people's life just based on face recognition. This was so controversial that actually Facebook turned this feature off last year. And we'd been complaining about this for years, but they've been then collecting and training their algorithms based on all our faces. And the way they got permission to do this was super, super deceptive because first of all, once you got this confirm a button up on the screen, which you often get on your phone when you're on your way home or on the bus or somewhere, and you want to check messages from friends, and they know this. The blue button that you got up was the accept button. If you wanted to say no, you had to click on an almost invisible button, similar to what Sylvia just described, that said more options, manage your data settings, which no one knows what means. And then they used skewed language to basically portray this initiative as something that would, and I'm simplifying it. So if you're a Facebook lawyer, don't sue me. But they basically said, we're going to use this technology to fight identity theft, to identify who's in the picture, and to help people with visual impairment see who's in the picture. And then they wrote, if you don't turn on this feature, we won't be able to help identity theft and help people with visual impairments. So I felt bad. And they used what we call confirm shaming. What they should have written was, we can use this technology to map your friends, map your feelings, of course also to do this identification that they also did, but we know that they use these things for other purposes. And the way they then portrayed it as making you feel bad, that was very, very bad. And, they received enough criticism that they turned this feature off. But the problem was they've now trained their face recognition algorithm based on billions of people's pictures. They still have the algorithm, and they still preserve the right to use it in the metaverse. So we could say they've illegally obtained the pictures of all their users, or at least most of their users, by using a dark pattern, and they're going to profit from that in future products.
Yes, I think I think there has been a discussion of, when you do something illegally, should you also delete the models that you have developed based on those illegally obtained pictures? So we haven't reached that point, but I think that's also quite an interesting discussion. I think there was at least a case.
Samson, can I just play with that idea one round? Because I don't think we understand, for example, in China, how much data is being collected from everybody in public spaces, among other places. There are lots and lots of cameras, but also in industrial processes, in digital virtual settings like finance, etc. And how important it is to use this data to train these algorithms over time. And the advantage you gain by training these algorithms earlier, faster than other actors, players in this field, might give you such a competitive edge that you might be impossible to catch up with over time. So I think there is, and that's what makes this such a paradox and such an impossible dilemma, because we would like some of our suppliers, some of our welfare providers in Norway to be competitive, right? So we can continue to get very good services for free rather than pay to people from the other parts of the world. But without the data, without the ability to train their algorithms on this data, they won't be competitive. So, can you both just say a couple of words about, how do you regulate this where you, as you say, it wasn't very easy to remove some of these patterns regulatively because they are not a part of your jurisdiction. So the only people you can regulate are the local ones, but you're also kind of punishing them in terms of their competitive ability. Now, just help me think about this.
Samson, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead. I will talk about a bit of the competition aspect later. Yeah.
Okay. So I would say that so we've actually filed a complaint against a company called Grindr, a dating app, because we mapped that they collected data and then passed it on to potentially hundreds of third parties. And you could say that if I was sharing data with Grindr or another dating app, and they only kept it in the dating app for those specific purposes of matching me with a person and stuff like that, that would have been okay. But the fact that they shared it with hundreds potentially or thousands of potentially third parties is a breach of trust. So I think that in that case, when you obtain data actually legally, it should be deleted. So that was actually one of the requirements we had, because that would reduce that competitive edge, right? That you described, Sylvia. At the same time, I do think that there's a huge market in the future for sharing your data with companies that you trust, right? So I can definitely foresee that a health tech actor who says that they need my data for this and this purpose, but are very clear on what purposes they're not going to use it for, and not share it, for example, with third parties, because I would be interested in sharing my health data if that could prevent me from getting cancer, right? Mm-hmm. But if that same data is being shared with Google, who could then use it to profile me, because we know there are cancer categories in the advertising industry, and that then prevents me from getting health insurance or even a mortgage. That's why I can't buy a house, because a financial actor deems me as a risk because I use a specific dating app, then it comes back to bite you. And I think that is so I really think that there's a very nuanced, it's possible to have a very nuanced approach where we can have sort of data sharing, and it's not either or, but I think the wild west of data sharing that we see today, because of sort of the advertising industry's need for data, if you can make that end, and then we can maybe have a discussion on how to have legitimate data sharing, where I actually think a lot of people would like to share data. They just don't like it to be misused, because it also has societal effects, right? If I share my DNA with you, because you're running a DNA company, I'm also giving up my family's DNA and my daughter's DNA, for example. And they haven't consented to this. So there's a collective aspect as well on data, which we also need to take into consideration. It's not only an individual choice. So what I'm hoping is that we can ban certain practices from ever being born into place. And one such example is we would like to ban what we call surveillance-based advertising, because we see some benefits to it, but we definitely see so many downsides of the data being shared in such a way. Ban facial recognition in public spaces. I think we should just ban that outright, because once the damage has happened, it's really hard to repair. And then have strict enforcement of the rules that we have, because that will also create a more level playing field for all the companies that are actually trying to abide by the law. And I think a majority of them really wants to do that. And I speak to Norwegian companies and European companies all the time, and they're very frustrated that the big tech companies, for example, don't get regulated the way they should be, because they are paying a lot of money to have good systems in place. They don't collect more data than they need to, but they're basically being punished in the competition field because other companies just achieve more data, and I would call it illegally.
Yeah, just one point in terms of this level playing field. I mean, yes, you mentioned, Sylvia, about some companies, especially those operating or at least founded outside of the European Union, perhaps might be gaining a competitive advantage because they can collect as much data they want and they can use it in whatever, for whatever purposes they want. Yes, that might be perhaps true in some sense, but as far as companies start providing their services in Europe, I think the idea is that they should abide by these rules that are aimed at creating this level playing field. And one important thing that's happening in the last few years is that, of course, data protection is not just about protecting the individual, it's also about competition. And we see increasingly now, for example, from Europe, and competition authorities are also paying attention how companies actually use data. So we have a case from Germany where the competition authority said, well, Facebook actually collects and uses data in breach of the GDPR. And we're not going to wait until the data protection authorities actually take action, because it's distorting competition in the advertising market. Because if you are an advertiser, a company that wants to provide advertising, then unless you also disregard the data protection rules, you won't be able to provide the same level of targeted advertisement as Facebook. So the competition authority actually said that, well, so the data protection authorities might fine for the breaches, but for us, this is a breach of competition law as well. And competition law, the company said that Facebook has to stop combining data from websites as well as from the subsidiaries they have. So we have to also to use all the possible tool sets we have. So we should not just restrict our toolset to data protection law, but also to consumer protection, which deals with design in a lot of respects, but also competition, which has actually much more stronger toolkit in terms of the enforcement, including breaking up of companies, but also imposing quite high fines for breaches of the rules. Yeah.
Samson, you wanted to talk also about the state of regulation. So now you just said we need to combine different kinds of law sets here. You talked about data protection. You talked about competition. I'm sure there'll be lots of ethics and God knows what else. So what's your thinking? What are the right steps to regulate this the right way?
I think Finn can start. I think Finn. So, what's the state of regulation? Do you think that we have enough or adequate regulation? Is the problem that you have uncovered in your report, is it occurring because of lack of regulation, or is it because of lack of enforcement? If it's because of lack of regulation, what kind of laws do you think would address the problems?
Yeah, so I think we have some laws in place that could help. I mean, the data protection regulation here in Europe is pretty good in theory, but it's not being enforced. So we're still waiting for even an initial response to our complaint against Google, which was 3.5 years ago. And if that is the rate of enforcement we're going to have, we need to look at other remedies. So consumer law is another aspect. We have filed a complaint against Amazon using European consumer law. There as well, enforcement is slow, and that even if we get Amazon gets fined by the Norwegian Consumer Protection Authority, it will only apply to Amazon, so it won't create a proper precedent for other companies to sort of respect. So I think that I've been taking part in the EU sort of expert group on dark patterns or deceptive design in the last 2 years, and we're looking where we have been discussing whether we could have certain bans in place also on certain type of practices, because some of them are really obvious, right? They are like, for example, it should be as easy to leave a service as to join a service, right? That has an impact. It's not today, right? It's very easy to identify these things. So I think we could have specific bans on specific practices, but also something that is a bit more future-proof, because I'm afraid that if you ban one practice, another one would just pop up somewhere else. So you need to have a flexible framework. And we need to find ways of more swiftly enforcing the law. And there we can also use technology. I think Princeton University have created robots that can detect certain types of dark patterns, and they crawl like thousands of websites. So you can use also modern tools in enforcement to do this. But also enforcement agencies then need to have the correct mandate to also penalize companies swiftly. But I think this also have to come in combination with a carrot, right? There needs to be carrot. But I think like there's a carrot in it by the fact that companies that are breaching the law are being punished. There's a carrot for everyone else. But it has to also be in combination with requirements, for example, with in regards to interoperability. So if you're in a service and you feel that Amazon is breaching your rights to choose, right, because they use a dark pattern, where do you go? So same with Facebook, same with Google. So you need to have requirements for interoperability and portability. So you can take your data out or use the competing service, but still be in contact with that big service, for example. I also think that the work that both Sylvia are doing and you are doing, Samson, is important. Education, of course, is a base here. I think we need to have a focus on design and deceptive design in marketing schools in particular, because I think that a lot of dark patterns are being taught in schools by people who are not aware that they are ethically very questionable. And then, I think also you need to look at incentive structures in companies, but I'm not quite sure how you regulate that, because I think today a lot of designers and marketing departments have KPI on reducing churn, for example. And how do you reduce churn? There was an expose on Amazon just a few weeks ago, how they reduced churn on Amazon Prime by creating dark patterns. And of course, the marketing department was heavily rewarded for that. They reduced churn by 10%. So some of these things are difficult to regulate, but I do think like the specific bans could help.
Great.
Samson, we have 5 minutes left. What would you like to focus on in those 5?
So I think just if Finn can also talk a little bit about, for example, there have been new legislative initiatives at EU level, and To what extent do you think, for example, the new legislative instruments, including the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act, actually touch upon some of the issues that you talked about? Do you think that this concept of dark patterns is receiving the attention it needs?
Yeah, good question. So I think that the two EU proposals, Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, are a good step in the right direction because it gives the European Commission tools to enforce anti-competitive behavior, for example. It also, the DSA gives requirement to increase transparency from the companies. It theoretically gives access to independent researchers and regulators. It requires companies to have risk mitigation strategies. And obviously, if they do this properly, you can probably avert some of the worst disasters. And it gives an opportunity for regulators to enforce better the laws we have and to understand how the companies work. So that's good. And the challenge was that there was a huge discussion at the European level on a ban on dark patterns, which was great. But sadly, at the last minute, from what I've heard, the text isn't even final when we're recording this. From what I've heard, the ban on dark patterns was heavily emptied out. So I don't know really what's left there. Because from what I've heard is that the dark patterns that are covered by consumer law or data protection law will not be covered by the DSA, which you can argue then is more or less everything. So I think we'll have to wait for future initiatives. And I think here there's a fitness check of EU consumer law, not a very sexy topic for listeners outside the EU bubble, but there's an opportunity to revise EU law coming up. And there's a serious discussion there about having some sort of ban list, for example, on certain dark patterns, which could bring this discussion onwards. Because I do fundamentally think that it's good to not have dark patterns in the long run, because I do think it creates trust. I mean, if you experience as a consumer that you're being locked in a service, it creates a lot of animosity. You start hating the service. But if you don't have anywhere to go, there's no, you have no way of voting with your feet. But I do think that if you have a healthy competitive environment, because you see that, for example, in cloud storage services where I think it was, or in streaming services, I think it was Netflix who introduced, if they saw that the user was inactive for a long period of time, they stopped taking their money. Because one of the dark patterns have been it's hard to leave and just keep taking your money even if you don't use the service. I think Dropbox had a similar feature. And in both those two areas, there's cloud storage services and in streaming, there's actual real competition.
Yeah.
So there's a strong argument to be made that in competitive areas, you would see less dark patterns because consumers are fed up with them. But the problem is, if the really good deceptive designs as a consumer, you don't notice because they are deceptive and manipulative and you don't know you're being manipulated. So there's still a room for enforcement and sort of regulation in this area because you cannot leave it to the consumer alone to deal with these things.
Samson, shall I do my summary and then maybe you can fill up with what I've missed. But I've actually learned a lot. Every time I listen to you, Finn, or speak with you, I learn a lot. And I think this maybe last point that you made, that we consumers are unable to take on this fight. We need people, both regulators and enforcers, that have the mandate and the interest and the knowledge. And then there has to be some kind of a big carrot for the people who do things right, because they are the necessary competition, like the example you gave with Netflix or Dropbox. It's the same thing with cloud services. There are 3 mega providers. It's Google, it's Amazon, and it's Microsoft. And, where do you go if you want something different or something else? And so we need at least one of them to be doing things in a way that doesn't have a complete lock-in, etc. So this there's some very interesting ideas about banning surveillance marketing. If I can throw in a recommendation for a book, I think Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff would be a really interesting follow-up for the students in this conversation. And this idea that there are very important collective aspects. So even though you tried to hide your newborn child from the social media, they discovered her. And even though I only share my own DNA with some sort of a health service, I am actually doing something to my children's privacy as well. So how do we think collectively about this? Lots of super interesting work to be done for students. What do you think, Samson?
Yes, this was as always quite interesting to listen to Finn, and I mean, I have also used many of the examples from the reports in classes, so they kind of really give you a vivid picture of what is really wrong, or the wrong way of thinking about design. And so that's quite interesting. But also, I also learned that actually, I mean, of course, it's quite known that the law kind of always lags behind the technology and the business practices. And as earlier mentioned in the podcast with Carey, I think one of the ideas is to actually engage with technology while it's still developing. So the work that Data Protection Authority is doing in terms of the AI sandbox, where you actually engage it and shape it before it's too late, is very, very important. And it is, and the work that Finn and his team are doing is equally important in terms of, raising the awareness. Okay, what is happening in practice? And the advocacy work and the communication that they have done. And they have been successful actually in removing products from the market before the law actually comes into place. So with Kyla, the doll, I think the product was actually removed from some countries before actually the legislator could actually take action. So I think this kind of discourse, advocacy, is as important as any measure we have. And I just want to commend Finn for all the great work he's doing and his team is doing at the Consumer Council.
Thank you very much.
I think this point also that, or 2 points actually, Samson, that I want to underline what you said. Slow regulation. The world is changing so fast, and our democratic processes, which are very good and very kind of consolidating, they are too slow to regulate this at the speed of development of these companies. So, how do we play that correctly? And maybe there is a new need to think about developing new regulation. And then this idea that the company that I also admire very much is called the Norske Veritas. They work with energy and shipping and so on, and they have this energy status report every year. And one of the biggest conclusions is that there is enough technology to save the world, but or they're technology optimists, but they are regulation pessimists. And you remind me of that quote. There is so much technology to do all this fancy marketing and services, but we are lacking the regulation.
Perhaps Finn can also just close the podcast with some final tips or final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think I'm really happy that we're having this discussion. I think it's really important that we engage across sort of our different bubbles, right? Our different areas of expertise. I think we need to talk more together. We had a conference, I think it was in March, together with Amnesty and the Labor Union in Norway. And we gathered, I think it was a first step of gathering organizations. I think we gathered 80 organizations to discuss 15 different challenges, everything from sort of labor rights to human rights, but all with the focus on how technology impacts those different areas. And I think that's a discussion we need to extend to academia, to regulation, to policy, and to start talking together, because I think we need to be preventative. And I mean, we have the precautionary principle in my world. And I think we really need to have a discussion which is based on what we know and what we sort of think of the future, so that we can actually then separate the good things from the bad things. And, going forward, with AI, big data, super smart computers, and also everything being connected in the house, often without displays, right? Of voice assistants invading our homes. Dark patterns, if they're not dealt with, will happen in the voice assistants, and we won't even see them. They will be written into the code in a way that we're going to be super hard to detect. So, for example, in dark patterns, this is a discussion that's not going to go away unless we find solutions to it.
It's just going to be bigger and more important. And so thank you both for enlightening us, inspiring us, maybe even scaring us a little bit. I think we all need to be scared a little bit. And also understanding the huge potential for good contribution, both from students and for people that already are in very interesting jobs at the moment. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.